Welcome to another episode of In Our Tax Time, a series of discussions with senior and influential figures in the tax profession. I'm John Whiting, and the aim of this series is to get senior people to look back at some of the issues, some of the tax matters that have shaped their career, and probably they've had quite an influence on in shaping the tax world that we, so many of us, work in today. Today I'm talking with Richard Mannion, a long-standing practitioner, my predecessor as president of the Institute, a man who's been with a couple of firms, Solomon Hare in particular, which became Smith & Williamson, a long-standing man in the West Country, Richard, which we always associate you with, but also very much associated with working together, which is really what I think we'll be talking a lot about today. But to begin at the beginning, if we can, what got you into tax in the first place?
Very good point, because my brother Mike was 7 years older than me and had left school to join the civil something. I could never remember whether it's the civil service or the civil defence, but he was working in the local tax office. And my parents thought it was the dream job because it was both indoors, but it also had a pension at the end of the day. And so they encouraged me to follow him. So I applied to join the prison service and of course ended up in the Frome tax office.
As you do, yes.
And Mike had a stellar career with the revenue. He suited it and it suited him, but it didn't suit me and I didn't suit it. And so 3 years down the track, I joined the profession.
And presumably saw quite a difference in revenue to profession in those days. And we're talking when, 1960s?
1969. And huge difference. You were able to get a job in the profession because you knew a little bit about tax, because you'd been in the revenue. But the truth was, what little you knew was of no real use in the profession, and you had to retrain, and you had to do that pretty quickly. Right,
and can you put your finger on anything in particular that you found as radically different in working arrangements, perhaps?
Everything. Being expected to stay on and finish something off if it was urgent, that was a very strange concept. There was no 9 to 5 in the profession.
So you moved into the profession in Bristol?
No, in London.
Right.
I joined a 20-partner firm in the city called Barton Mayhew, which later became a constituent part of Ernst Young.
Right.
And a terrific firm, and got me off to a real good start. Helped me to become an ATII and gave me articles to later become a chartered accountant.
And stayed with them for how long?
Just 2 years,
right.
And then moved back to the West Country for family reasons. And ended up a year later with a small firm in Bristol called Solomon Hare, which later became the 21st largest firm in the country in its own right.
Right.
So although I started with a small firm, I actually ended up with quite a large firm.
So most of your career has been in Bristol and area, although of course in your latter days with Solomon Hare joining Smith & Williamson, you became virtually a season ticket commuter up to London. So you've obviously seen a fair bit of Bristol, fair bit of London. How do you compare the two over the career that you've had?
The obvious comparison is that Bristol is a lot smaller than London, but the problems are virtually the same. You come across the same issues in a place like Bristol as you do in London. In Bristol, a lot of entrepreneurial activity, but a firm the size of Solomon Hare would be trawling outside of Bristol. We were trawling nationally. Would you believe that we had a sponsors box at the Bolton Wanderers football ground because we were big in Bolton?
Just because you happened to have an office in Bolton? Yeah.
We didn't have an office in Bolton, we just had lots of clients in Bolton who were all concerned with the football club, so it was obviously the thing to do.
Right, well, it's amazing how it happens. And
yes.
Did you enjoy the hospitality of the box?
Very much, particularly when Arsenal beat them.
Okay, let's not go there. Throughout all of this, you'd obviously been sensing that, things could get better with liaison with the revenue, perhaps? This became the genesis of working together?
Yes, it wasn't my idea. It was actually, I got involved through the regional director in the Southwest, a man called Andrew McPherson, who launched a customer service initiative in the 1990s, which worked really, really well. So you had the local DIs working with reps from CIOT, from the other professional bodies in the Southwest, trying to sort out problems that arose in the area.
Right.
And we were able to sort out local problems like an office closing early and maybe not being able to get the post delivered to them, things like that. But if it was a national issue, the answer was, well, we can't do anything about that, which always seemed a bit of a shame to me, that there were all these national issues and nobody was doing anything about them.
But this had obviously given you a bit of a taste, and we ought to just bring in the Institute, CIOT, at this point, because, of course, you've got a long history of involvement with Institute activities.
My career with CIOT started 40 years ago with Bristol branch, and I filled every position on the committee, treasurer, secretary, and then chairman. So I was known to our opposite numbers in the revenue.
Which, of course, helped this local initiative.
Absolutely.
But continuing with the Institute for the moment, you did, of course, you got onto council and you started to ascend the greasy pole of presidency. And did this start you thinking a bit more about what became working together?
Yeah, you'll remember that back in those days, the new incoming vice president was expected to start thinking about themes for his presidential year. And I had a number of themes. One of them was to try and improve the tax system, which at that stage was a bit of a shambles. But secondly, to show that CIOT really cared for what I call the ordinary member in practice in the places like Bristol. Right. And so this enabled me to do the two together. So by tackling the first, I was able to show ordinary members that we were trying to do something that helped their profitability, but also their aggravation, their stress levels.
So this really was trying to get at those little irritations of life in any practice, I guess.
Yeah. You will remember that self-assessment came in 1996. 1998, things were not going well. CIOT had a research study in 1998 which highlighted all of these areas that were causing quite a lot of aggravation and identified the need to improve the pathways of communication with the revenue, but also sort out some of these nitty-gritty areas. So again, CIOT had identified the point, put the spotlight on them, and I was concerned that nobody was then going to pick the ball up and run with it.
And so therefore that it all begins to come together, doesn't it? Your experience, that bit of experience with sorting things out locally, you're now on a bit of national stage. And of course you also started to try and find one or two like-minded people in other bodies to add to the impetus.
Yes.
Is that the way it happened?
It did. I started with a chap called Geoffrey Bush, who was then the deputy chairman of the Inland Revenue, who had trained me when I was 18. So I had an in to speak to him about it. And the revenue had been told by the ministers that they needed to react to that research study. They needed to get their act together. They needed to show a little bit more customer service. They were looking after customers, not taxpayers. So I went to him with this idea of taking those customer service initiatives that were happening, put them on a national scale, and capture the points that were coming up from those areas that were national points, get them dealt with. And he embraced the idea wholeheartedly, but laid down two conditions. Firstly, he wouldn't work with CIOT alone. Right. I had to go off and I had to recruit the other professional bodies. But he also wanted it to be really national, so it had to include Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So the next stage was to form a working party with Richard Shooter and Susan Gompels from ICAW, who, unbeknown to me, had been involved in customer service initiatives in their own areas and were very passionate about it. And the revenue appointed a thrusting young man called Gordon Smith, who was terrific, who had just the right attitude. And we then went back to the revenue with a formal proposal, which later became a contract.
And it was a formal contract that was signed?
It was signed by me on behalf of CIOT. It was signed by Robert Mars on behalf of ICAW. And also it's the last act of Geoffrey Bush as Deputy Chairman of Inland Revenue on the day he retired.
Excellent. So a little monument for him.
Yes.
So you've got this agreement, you've obviously got a committee, but of course one of the great things about working together is, and you've alluded to it, it was a national body. You had to get a complete network. I mean, was that easy to get that network?
It wasn't so easy on day one because there were 700 tax districts then, and to try and get local meetings happening with 700 districts was always going to be a big ask. But it wasn't long before the Revenue announced they were going to move to an area structure with something like 60 areas. And so that started to become doable. Mm-hmm. It became possible then to have meetings with each of the area directors, the 60 area directors. Right. And to feed that in to a centre, the Revenue appointed a team. They actually set up a team of 5, which included David Earle, who was a practitioner who had recently retired and was taken on by the Revenue onto that team.
And the core of this remained, well, almost as you'd had originally in the West Country, local discussions between practitioners and now the regional office.
Yes, and the contract actually spelled out how these meetings should be conducted. They should be two-way, they should be open, they should be collaborative. They shouldn't be about an individual case. You shouldn't go to a meeting and say, I don't think you've dealt with my case properly. It was all about trying to find the grit in the system and get it sorted.
And either local grit or, of course, grit that suddenly seemed to be national grit that could get fed up the tree.
Absolutely.
So you've got this system up and running, Richard, and it began to run pretty well, and you got an awful lot of meetings and, well, I would guess we know a lot of successes, let's not be modest. Anything you'd point to in particular that you could say working together really achieved that? You know, any things you're particularly proud of?
Yes. At the lower level, then there was a lot of grit in the system that was tackled. Things that really wouldn't stand out 15 years later, although one does stick in my memory very clearly, and that was a real-life case of somebody who had been taken ill in the office, rushed into hospital in an ambulance, and the employer then sent some flowers to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And sometime later, the Revenue were trying to tax the cost of the flowers as a benefit in kind. Yeah. Okay. And we brought this to the attention of the person centrally who was able to make a decision, and they issued an edict saying, please use your common sense to people in the Revenue, people in the field.
Or at least gave them the power to use common sense,
yes.
in a sense.
So there was an edict issued about trivial expenses, and I see that got back into the spotlight more recently. And,
yeah, with my other hat of OTS, yes, we've been trying to get that, well, really rolled out nationally and enshrined. So that's what we ought to call it, the working together clause. Yeah.
So that was at the lower end, but at the higher end, we managed to build a relationship of trust with some very senior people in the Revenue. And I'm not sure that was there before. And that enabled us to get access to the ministers. You may remember that in the old days, if you owned a holiday home in Portugal through a corporate vehicle because of the airship rules in Portugal, the Revenue would then try to tax you on a benefit.
Because you're the director and deemed director, etc.
Yep. And nobody liked that, including the Revenue, but they didn't know how to solve the issue. And so Nigel Eastaway, myself, and Francesca Lagerberg wrote the new legislation for them. And we managed to get time in the finance bill to actually sort that out. But that was a direct result of having that relationship with the senior people in the Revenue.
It's a very good message, isn't it, that by working together, you really built that relationship and built the trust that, I can remember, because obviously I was in practice at the same time as you, very often wasn't there.
Yes, I can remember some knocking copy in accounting in the accounting web saying, "Why don't we just go on strike? Why don't we tell them where to get off?" I just didn't see any value
No.
in that approach, and to have that collaborative approach to what were shared problems. When things didn't go well, they didn't go well for the revenue, they didn't go well for the practitioner, they didn't go well for the taxpayer. So there was a shared interest.
So in many ways, that's what working together is all about, sort of collaboration, trust building, etc. But I just ought to ask, the name working together, your idea, Revenue's idea?
No, not my idea. It was definitely the revenue's idea. It was either Jeff Bush or Sir Nicholas Montague, one of the others, who came up with, who termed the idea.
Yeah.
It did seem very appropriate.
Very appropriate and very apposite, and does what it says on the proverbial tin.
Yes.
But working together obviously achieved a lot. You've just highlighted a couple of things, but I think perceptibly it sort of went slightly off the boil, possibly because of more revenue organisations or just the way things worked changing.
Yeah, in my humble opinion, I think we achieved quite a lot before 2005 when the merger took place between Inland Revenue and Customs. And when the merger happened, all the people that we had been dealing with were thrown up in the air, landed in different places, didn't know what team they were in, didn't know who they related to inside the revenue, and that really was a shambles. But moreover, prior to 2005, we had some very senior people who were endorsing working together. So we had Sir Nicholas Montague, we had Anne Chant, his deputy. Anne Chant was the Revenue's customer service person.
Right.
And so she was really keen to see working together succeed. And they both retired in 2005. And it takes two to tango. Whilst Sir Nick and Anne have been very happy to be on the dance floor with us, I never felt that the subsequent chairmen were of that ilk. They didn't really want to dance with us.
So it began to get less impetus, and as I've alluded to, we all know revenue reorganisations, that sort of link was lost. And also, of course, you couldn't do anything locally with the revenue. It all had to be national. So that presumably alters the dynamics of working together.
Yes, so we lost the districts, we lost the areas. You now had specialist centres, and of course you had the dreaded call centre. So millions of people are now dealt with in call centres, and it's very difficult to have a working together meeting with a call centre, even if that's the area that really needs the attention.
So should working together evolve? Well, I mean, we know it's continuing, but does it need to evolve into different focus, if you like? Is it still needed?
As you said, I retired last year, but certainly in the years up to my retirement, I could see that the need was still there. There's still a lot of grit in the system, hopefully different grit than we discovered back in 1998, 1999. But an awful lot of grit still to be sorted. So the need is as great now as it's ever been, but as I say, it does need two to tango. I felt that the revenue became more interested in building a very sophisticated model for capturing the problems and not dealing with them. So they needed to have a lovely looking spreadsheet that captured all of these points, but nobody was actually going off and making sure that they were dealt with.
That's very interesting to me with, well, one of my other hats on, because working together is still there, and we know Nigel Clark is chairing it and taking it forward, and there's still a lot of effort going in. But it's kind of worrying if the gathering of the problems, the identification is still there, but the action isn't.
The move to digital is either going to help or hinder. I fear it is the latter. I just feel it's part of the revenue devaluing the whole process, stopping listening to real people. And if you can't get the question posed on the right form in the right way, then they're not going to deal with it. So that listening ear is no longer there.
I definitely get the message from you, Richard, that working together should continue. Okay, like anything else, it needs to evolve, but you certainly think we need to put weight behind it and get back on the dance floor to tango.
I look again occasionally at that contract we signed back in 1999, and it says all I think that is necessary. So there were 4 layers: 1 to have local meetings, 2 to capture the issues, 3 to sort the issues, 4 to report back. If those were all working as they should, then I don't think anybody would complain about working together.
Right. You, and I think you were reporting something Jeff Bush said, described working together as of its time. I mean, you're giving the clear message that its time is still today. Looking back on it, would you count it as one of your best achievements throughout your long professional career?
Well, I'm sure it led to me getting the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006.
Rightly so.
I'm always very careful about being proud of anything because I know pride comes before a fall, but I do believe that all of the people that have been involved over the last 17 years, and they include some very well-known names, Robert Mars, John Whiting, for example, Anthony Thomas, Jean Jesty, John Kimmer, Derek Allen. The list goes on of people who have put effort into that because they thought it was worthwhile.
And some good people at the Revenue as well, because I think, you mentioned Jeff Bush, Gordon Smith, they've put effort into it as well.
Stephen Banyard.
Of course.
And it concerned me when Stephen retired that we were losing a very strong ally with Stephen's going. But for me, I would always look at Nigel Eastaway as being a great technical guru, a terrific technical brain. But Nigel thought that working together was worth his own personal support and put a huge amount of effort into that.
So the message is, Richard, we should go back and really reinvigorate working together. And for yourself, although you're not formally involved in it, you'll certainly be watching us from a distance.
Cheering from the sidelines.
Cheering from the sidelines. Well, Richard Mannion, thank you so much for taking us back through working together. It's been please don't be modest, it is a really considerable achievement of yours, a very well-deserved component of that very well-deserved Lifetime Award, and I'm only pleased to see that Lifetime continues and continues to serve you well. But for the moment, Richard Mannion, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.